9 calls. That's how many times the ICU reached my parents while I was unconscious. 9 calls. 0 visitors. 0 questions about whether I was going to live in. My sister posted a photo from a beach in Cabo on day 4, and on day 6, when I finally opened my eyes, the first person sitting in the waiting room wasn't my mother. It was my grandmother's lawyer, holding a recorder they didn't know existed. My name is Claire. I'm 31. If you asked my parents to describe me at a dinner party, they would use words like sensitive, difficult, and their favourite, dramatic. If you asked my grandmother, she would say I was the only one in the family who still knew how to listen. That gap between those 2 descriptions is where this story lives. I grew up in a house where love was measured in attendance. My older sister Vanessa got applause for showing up. I got lectures for having feelings about it. Vanessa was the golden child, the social one. The one who knew how to laugh at my father's jokes and compliment my mother's new kitchen tiles and make everyone feel like the family was warm. I was the one who noticed when the warmth wasn't real. When I was 12, I got bronchitis and missed Vanessa's choir recital. My mother told me I'd ruined the evening on purpose. When I was 19, I called from the ER after a panic attack, and my father said, "What do you want me to do about it?" So by the time I was 31, I had learned something important. In my family, needing help was treated as a character flaw. Grandma Helen was the exception. She was 87, sharp as a tax attorney, and lived 20 minutes from my parents in a small assisted living apartment she paid for herself. She played bridge on Tuesdays, drank 1 glass of red wine on Fridays, and called me every Sunday at 4. She never called me dramatic. She called me careful. "Claire," she said once, "the loudest people in a family are not always the strongest. Sometimes they're just the most afraid of being found out." I didn't know what she meant then. I know now. By 31, I'd built a life that looked modest to them and stable to me. 1-bedroom apartment, administrative job at a medical clinic. Ironically, the kind of place that knows what ICU paperwork looks like. Health insurance through work. A savings account my parents had asked about twice at holidays, with the casual tone people use when they're not actually asking. Vanessa had the house, the husband, the destination wedding fund that somehow needed topping up every year. I had grandma's Sunday calls and a quiet pride in not owing anyone. That was the crime, I think. Not that I was dramatic, that I wasn't convenient. The accident was stupid and ordinary. Rain on the highway, a truck changing lanes without signalling. My Honda Civic doing exactly what physics says a Honda Civic will do when a 20-ton vehicle decides your lane is also its lane. I don't remember the impact, I remember fragments. Rain on glass, the horn, a sound like a garbage can rolling downstairs, and then nothing. When I woke up, I wasn't really awake. I was in that grey place between sedation and consciousness where time doesn't attach to anything. Tubes, beeps, a nurse whose name I would later learn was Patricia. Later, the police report would say I was lucky. Collapsed lung, broken ribs, concussion, no internal bleeding that couldn't be managed, lucky. The ICU nurse would be the first person to tell me my parents had been contacted immediately. She would not be the first person to lie to me about what happened next. What I learned later, the ambulance crew had tried my mother twice before I was even loaded. No answer. They tried my father. Voicemail. They used the clinic emergency contact, Maya. My co-worker, because I'd once listed her on a workplace form. After a co-worker had a seizure and nobody could reach her husband, Maya showed up at the hospital before I was out of imaging. She sat in the waiting room for 6 hours. She answered questions. She signed nothing she wasn't supposed to sign. She texted my mother herself at 11:42 p.m. Claire is in surgery. You need to come. My mother replied at 1:06 a.m. We can't tonight. Keep us posted. Maya screenshot that message. She didn't know she'd be giving it to a lawyer 10 days later. She just knew it made her furious. I owe Maya more than I can say. But this isn't Maya's story. It's mine and Grandma's, and the story of what happens when a family discovers the hospital keeps better records than they do. Day 1. Patricia was calm in the way only ICU nurses can be calm, like she'd seen worse, which meant she probably had. She told me I had been in surgery for 4 hours. She told me my phone had been bagged and stored. She told me my emergency contact on file was my mother, Linda Marsh. Has she come? I whispered. My throat felt like I'd swallowed gravel. Patricia hesitated. That hesitation told me more than her answer. Social work is involved, she said. We'll keep trying. I slept. Day 2. I was more awake and more aware that my body hurt in places I didn't know could hurt. Patricia updated me. My mother had been reached. My mother had said she was dealing with a family situation and would try to come when things settled. Vanessa texted my phone, which Patricia brought to the bedside after I asked. A single message. That sounds awful. Can't talk, Ron, we're at the resort. Call you when we're back. Day 3, the hospital called my mother again. I know because Patricia told me quietly when she changed my IV. Third call, she said. We're documenting everything. Documenting what? She looked at me the way you look at someone when you're deciding how much truth they can hold. Contact attempts, she said. Visitor logs. What next of kin are told. That was the first time I understood this wasn't just neglect. It was being witnessed. Day 4, Vanessa posted on Instagram. Beach, cocktails, a caption about needed rest. I saw it because a co-worker, the only person who knew I'd been in an accident at all, because I'd texted her from the ambulance before they sedated me, sent me a screenshot with 3 question marks. I stared at that photo until Patricia gently took the phone away. Don't do that to yourself, she said. I'm not doing it, I said. They are. Maya visited on day 4. Not long. ICU rules. 10 minutes. She brought nothing flashy. Just a hair tie and chapstick because she said hospitals steal your dignity in small ways. They're saying you're exaggerating, she whispered, angry on my behalf before I even knew the full truth. Who's saying that? Your mom. To the nurse's station. I heard her when I came in. That was the first time I heard it from the building itself, not from a log read back to me later. My mother had walked to the nurse's station, sighed like a martyr, and said, Claire's always been high-strung. I don't want the staff encouraging dependency. Dependency, as if breathing through a chest tube were a lifestyle choice. Patricia filed another note. Day 5. Grandma Helen died at 6:14 in the morning. Patricia told me after breakfast she sat down, which nurses don't always do, and she said, Claire, I'm very sorry. The assisted living facility called the hospital because your grandmother listed you as her medical contact for emergencies. She passed early this morning. I couldn't cry properly because crying hurt my ribs. I asked if my parents knew. Patricia said, Your mother was notified about your grandmother 4 hours ago. In. I asked if they had come to the hospital yet. Patricia didn't answer. She didn't have to. Here's what I learned later. From Patricia, from hospital records. In. And from a social worker named Denise, who would become very important to me. On call number 1, my mother told the ICU desk that she couldn't get away from work. On call number 2, she asked whether I was actually serious this time. On call number 3, she told the nurse I had a history of attention-seeking behaviour and that they should not escalate unless absolutely necessary. Let me say that again, because I had to hear it twice before I believed it. While I was unconscious with a collapsed lung, my mother told the hospital I was dramatic. On call number 4, my father got on the phone and asked whether I had insurance that would cover everything because he didn't want surprise bills. On call number 5, my mother asked the nurse if I had signed anything. The nurse said I was sedated. My mother said, right, but had she signed anything before? Patricia told me that detail with professional neutrality. I appreciated that. I needed one adult in the building who wasn't performing. On call number 6, Vanessa answered. She laughed. Patricia didn't know at what and said she would tell Mom again. On call number 7, my mother said she was planning Grandma's arrangements and couldn't come until the weekend. Grandma had been alive when she said that. On call number 8, my father asked the hospital for my room number in case they drove up. They didn't drive up. Call number 9 came after Grandma died. My mother cried on the phone. Real tears. Patricia said. She said she had too much on her plate and asked whether I was stable enough to wait. Stable enough to wait, as if consciousness were a scheduling conflict. Denise, the social worker, started a file. Patricia made notes. The hospital did what institutions do when a pattern becomes undeniable. They documented. I didn't know any of this on day 5. I only knew my grandmother was gone, and my chest hurt, and the chair beside my bed had never been pulled out for a visitor, but Grandma had known. That's the part that changed everything. Denise sat with me for 40 minutes on day 5 afternoon. She didn't patronise. She explained that hospitals see family abandonment more than people want to believe, and that documentation protects patients, not punishes families. Are you in danger? She asked. Physically? No. Emotionally? I looked at the empty chair. I've been in danger a long time. She nodded like that answer cost her nothing and saved me something. If you have someone you trust, not on this form, tell me, she said. Grandma, I said, but I couldn't finish. Denise already knew. She squeezed my hand once, professionally, humanly, and left. Grandma and I had spoken 9 days before the accident. Not a long call. She complained about the new dining room chairs. I complained about my boss. She asked whether I'd updated my emergency contacts. Still your mother? She asked. Hospital form requires it, I said. She said. That was Grandma for, I disagree, but I'm not going to fight you today. Then she said something odd. If anything ever happens to you, she said, don't assume the people who are supposed to show up will show up. That's dark, Grandma. It's accurate, she said. I've been watching your mother manage crises for 40 years. She manages them by waiting for someone else to fix them. I laughed. I shouldn't have. 3 weeks before my accident. Grandma had visited Margaret Chen, the same estate attorney she'd used when Grandpa died. I didn't know that then. I know now because Margaret told me. Grandma had noticed things in my mother asking about Claire's savings account, my father asking Helen whether Claire had named beneficiaries on her work insurance, in Vanessa joking at Easter that if Claire ever got hurt, someone would need to handle her apartment. Small comments, family comments, in the kind you swallow because making them explicit sounds paranoid. Grandma wasn't paranoid. She was 87 and had survived a husband, a war, and 2 children who measured love in property value. She asked Margaret to do 3 things. First, update her own will to include a trust clause protecting Claire's access to a separate account she'd opened years ago. $42,000 she'd been quietly setting aside because, as she told Margaret, that girl is going to need an exit plan. Second, give Margaret limited power to act on Claire's behalf if Claire was ever incapacitated and next of kin failed to fulfill medical support obligations. Third, and this is the part my parents never saw coming, install a legally disclosed voice recorder in her apartment for family calls. Because my mother had started calling more frequently after Helen's last cardiologist appointment. She asks about accounts, Grandma told Margaret. Not about my health. Margaret advised disclosure. Grandma disclosed. There was a small sign near her phone. This call may be recorded for my protection. My mother laughed at it, paranoid as always. Mom, she said on a recording I would later hear in a room full of people who suddenly forgot how to breathe. On that same recording, 2 minutes later, my mother asked whether Helen had updated beneficiaries since the cardiologist visit. Grandma said, "I'm not dying yet, Linda," my mother said. "Well, we should be practical." Practical, the family word for mine. Grandma wasn't paranoid. She was prepared. Margaret showed me a timeline later, colour-coded, because of course Grandma had chosen a lawyer who used timelines. 6 months ago, first suspicious call logged. 4 months ago, Helen adds Claire as secondary contact at assisted living. 3 months ago, trust draft begins. 6 weeks ago, recorder installed with disclosure sign. 9 days before accident, Helen and Claire's Sunday call, emergency contact conversation. 72 hours after Claire's admission, Margaret authorised to open file Helen 2026. When the ICU made call number 9, Margaret Chen was already holding a folder. Not because she had psychic powers, because Grandma had left instructions. If Claire is hospitalised and Linda does not appear within 72 hours, open file Helen 2026 and proceed. 72 hours passed. Linda did not appear. Margaret proceeded. What Grandma couldn't have known was that she herself would die on day 5 of Claire's hospitalisation. But Margaret said Helen had planned for that too, a clause that accelerated everything if Helen died while Claire was incapacitated. She didn't trust the timing of fate, Margaret said. She trusted paperwork more. I woke up properly on day 6, not just open eyes, clear mind. The fog lifted enough for fear to find me. "Where are my parents?" I asked Patricia. She looked at the door. "They haven't been here," she said gently. I stared at the ceiling, counted the acoustic tiles, made it to 40 before my eyes burned. "Okay," I said. Not dramatic, not performative, just okay. The way you say okay when the worst thing you feared about your family turns out to be true. Denise came by with paperwork, medical decisions, follow-up care, a list of people authorised to receive updates. I added Patricia's name before I added my mother's. That afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Claire Marsh, this is Margaret Chen. I was your grandmother Helen's attorney. I'm sitting in the ICU waiting area because your grandmother asked me to be here if your family failed to be. I believe they have failed. We should talk when you're able. I was able. Not physically, emotionally, which, in my family, had always been treated as the lesser kind. Margaret sat in the guest chair my parents never occupied. She didn't hug me. She didn't perform sympathy. She opened a folder and said, "Your grandmother loved you very much. She hoped she was wrong about your parents. She wasn't. She showed me the call log first. Hospital documentation, 9 attempts. Visitor log. 0 entries for Linda or Robert Marsh. Then she showed me Grandma's instructions. Then she told me about the recordings. I won't play them here," she said. "You don't need that in a hospital bed." But your mother called your grandmother on day 4 of your hospitalization to ask whether Claire's apartment lease could be handled while Claire was incapacitated. Your grandmother asked her to come to the hospital. Your mother said she couldn't manage the stress. I closed my eyes. "There's more," Margaret said. Of course there was. While I was sedated, my father had gone to my apartment building with a copy of a document he claimed gave him access as my emergency financial contact. The building manager called Vanessa first because Vanessa had once dated the manager's cousin. The manager denied entry and called the number on my lease, my work emergency contact. Not my mother. That call went to Denise, because Denise had already opened a social file and the hospital had flagged me as isolated. Bad luck for my father, good luck for me. Margaret said, "Your grandmother's trust activates on proof of abandonment during medical incapacitation. That proof exists. The trust covers your medical costs, your housing, and legal fees." "Your parents are not beneficiaries," I whispered. "She planned for this. She planned for you," Margaret said. I spent the next 2 days doing something strange. Learning to breathe without pain while learning my family without illusion. Patricia taught me the breathing exercises. Margaret taught me the legal ones. My mother called on day 7, not to apologise, to ask whether this lawyer situation was really necessary. I let it go to voicemail. Margaret returned the call. Vanessa texted in. "Why are you making this a thing?" Maya texted. "I'm bringing soup when they move you to regular floor. No argument, 2 worlds. 1 honest, 1 performative." I chose on day 8 in. Before my parents arrived, Margaret played me 1 recording privately. Just 1. My mother's voice on the day Grandma died. "We can't keep running to Claire every time she hiccups." Mum was old. Claire will understand. I didn't understand. I accepted. Understanding is for people who want peace. Acceptance is for people who want to survive. The regular floor was different from the ICU. More light, more voices, less beeping. I learned to walk again in a hallway that smelled like lemon disinfectant and old coffee. Each step hurt. Each step was mine. A physical therapist named Jordan told me to count tiles. I counted. I made it to 42 before I had to sit. Maya brought soup on day 9. Chicken noodle, too salty, perfect. She didn't ask me to forgive anyone. She asked what I needed. Time, I said. "You've got it," she said. Margaret visited twice more before discharge. She explained the trust in plain language, not to punish my parents, but to prevent them from accessing my apartment, my clinic benefits, or my bank accounts while I recovered. The trust would fund 6 months of rent, medical co-pays and legal fees if anyone contested Grandma's wishes. Will they contest? I asked. People who think entitlement is love usually try, Margaret said. That's why Helen hired me. Grandma had also left me a note separate from the legal letter, handwritten shaky in the last week, but legible, Claire. If you're reading this in a hospital bed, I'm sorry I wasn't there to hold your hand. I tried to make them come in. I documented when they wouldn't. Don't waste your recovery on wishing they'd become someone else. Get well, then live quietly and well. That's the revenge I want for you. I read it until the words blurred, not from weakness, from relief. My parents showed up on day 8, not because they heard my voice on the phone, because Margaret sent a formal letter to their home, informing them that Helen's estate trustee had assumed temporary financial authority over Claire's care, and that all inquiries regarding Claire's apartment, accounts or medical decisions should be directed to Margaret's office. Suddenly, I was worth the drive. My mother cried in the hallway. My father asked the nurses who was behind this. Patricia referred him to Denise. Denise referred him to Margaret. Margaret referred him to a chair. I was sitting up by then, still bandaged, still slow, but upright, which felt symbolic. My mother said, "We were coming. We had Grandma's funeral. We had Vanessa's trip. You know how overwhelming everything was." I said, "You told the nurse I was being dramatic." Silence. That silence was the first honest thing they'd given me in a week. Vanessa said, "That's taken out of context." Patricia, still calm, said from the doorway, "It's documented. My father changed tactics. Softer voice. Fatherly. Claire, whatever you think happened, we're still your family." Grandma knew that too, I said. "That's why she recorded you. You know that moment in movies when the room goes quiet? It's real." My mother laughed, high and brittle. "Your grandmother was senile at the end." Margaret, who had been standing by the window, turned around. Helen Voss was assessed competent by 2 physicians on March 4th of this year, she said. "I have the letters. I also have recordings. Would you like to hear them now? Or at the family meeting scheduled for Friday?" There was going to be a family meeting. Of course there was. Grandma had requested one in her instructions. If my daughter Linda fails Claire during hospitalisation, Margaret will convene all parties and present file Helen 2026 at the Assisted Living Chapel Conference Room. Even her revenge was organised. The hospital confrontation on day 8 was almost anticlimactic. My mother cried. My father threatened to call hospital administration. Patricia referred him to patient advocacy. Advocacy referred him to the documented call log. He stopped shouting. What he really wanted wasn't me. It was access to my apartment, my accounts, the narrative that they were the overwhelmed parents of a difficult daughter, not the adults who told a nurse their child was faking a collapsed lung. Vanessa tried charm. "We should talk privately," she said, touching my blanket. "I'm done with private," I said. That was new, not loud, not dramatic. Just on Friday, not a hospital room, not my apartment, a neutral conference room with bad coffee and good acoustics. My parents came. Vanessa came. 2 of my mother's siblings came. The aunt and uncle who always didn't want to get involved. Margaret came. Denise came as a witness because the hospital's documentation had been formally requested. Patricia came on her day off, which is something I will never forget. Margaret did not make a speech. She pressed play My mother's voice, sweet and tired. Mom, Claire's in the hospital again. I can't keep running over there. She does this. Grandma, she was in a car accident. My mother, she's always in some crisis. Grandma, are you going to the hospital? My mother, Vanessa's wedding planning is at a critical stage. Claire's stable. The nurses said stable. Grandma, I want you to go. My mother, sharper now. Why are you recording this? Grandma, calm. Because you need to hear yourself one day. Second recording, my father. If Claire's incapacitated, we should get into her place before bills pile up. Grandma, Robert, you will not touch her apartment. My father, mother, don't be dramatic. The irony in that room was almost physical. Third recording, day 4 of my hospitalization. My mother, crying, real tears again. Mom, I can't do everything. Claire's hospital, your appointments, Vanessa needs me. Grandma, Claire needs you, my mother. Claire's always needed something. Fourth recording, the one that silenced the room. My father, 2 weeks before the accident, at Grandma's apartment. If something happens to Claire, we should be on her accounts. For medical decisions, Grandma, you weren't on her birth certificate of courage either, Robert. My father, that's not fair. Grandma, neither is abandoning her in a hospital. Fifth recording, day 3 of my hospitalization. Vanessa's voice in the background. My mother, she'll be fine. She always lands on her feet. Vanessa, muffled. Tell her, we said hi. No one asked to be put on the phone. Then silence. Margaret stopped the player. She didn't look triumphant. She looked tired, the way people look when they're executing an elderly client's last wish because the client was right and the family was wrong. She placed the hospital call log next to it. 9 calls. Visitor log. 0. She placed Maya's screenshot next. The 1:06 a.m. reply. She placed Grandma's trust documents next. She placed a letter Grandma had handwritten the week before she died. It said, Claire, I hoped they would show up for you. If they didn't, don't waste your life waiting for them to become people they never were. Take the help. Keep the house you built. Let the paper do the talking. My aunt cried. My uncle stared at the table. Vanessa looked at her phone and then put it away. The first wise decision she'd made all week. My mother said, This is a betrayal. Margaret said, No, this is a record. My father stood up, sat back down, stood up again. You can't do this, he said. It's done, Margaret said. Helen did it. I am executing it. After the meeting, my Aunt Barbara walked me to the parking lot. She said, I should have said something years ago. I said, You didn't, but you stayed in the room today. That was enough for then. I didn't scream. I didn't gloat. I didn't ask them to apologise. I asked Patricia to wheel me closer to the coffee machine because hospital coffee had ruined my standards, and I needed something terrible to drink while I decided what my life looked like without people who only showed up when a lawyer sent a letter. My parents left before the meeting ended. Vanessa texted me 2 days later. Can we talk? I didn't block her. I just didn't answer. Margaret handled the rest. Medical bills covered, apartment secured, a formal notice that my parents had no authority over my accounts. I went home 3 weeks later, alone, except not alone, because Patricia called on day 1, and Denise called on day 3, and Margaret called every Friday for a month to make sure nobody was trying anything stupid. Grandma's $42,000 became the start of an exit fund, not revenge money, freedom money, 6 months later, I changed my emergency contact to Maya. I still live in the same apartment. I still work at the clinic. Patricia sends a Christmas card. Margaret sends a bill only when necessary. My mother called once on my birthday. I didn't answer. Vanessa liked a photo of my garden on Instagram. I'd started tomatoes the way Grandma used to, in soil that was never as good as she pretended. I didn't block them. I just stopped waiting for them to become people they never were. The recording still exists. I don't listen to it. I don't need to. The hospital already wrote the version I trust in. People ask if I feel guilty for playing a recording in front of the family. No guilt is for people who did something wrong. I was unconscious in the ICU. I didn't record anyone in. I didn't trap anyone. I survived. They told the hospital I was dramatic while I fought to breathe. Grandma heard them. Grandma believed me. Grandma left proof. Was I wrong? Let me know in the comments. And if your family ever abandoned you when you needed them most, I want to hear your story. Subscribe if you want more stories where the quietest person in the room had the receipts all along.